Well, hello everyone, welcome back to another video where today I want to talk a little bit more about the switch that I did in the summer from Sony to Panasonic. I'm now shooting on the Lumix S5ii, have been for a number of months, and I did share some first impressions in a video back in the summer, but today I want to talk specifically about a lens, and it's this kit lens, the L-mount 20 to 60 millimeter variable aperture. I think it's a 3.5 to a 5.6. It's a kit lens, and kit lenses get a bit of a bad rep here on YouTube and just in general, but this lens, I think, changes the tide on that whole perspective, I suppose. But this isn't a video specifically about this lens, although I am going to be talking about it. I think there's going to be takeaways from this video that apply to any variable zoom lens of an equivalent focal length. So you can sort of take the points that I'm going to talk about in this video and you can relate them to other lenses, whether that's like a Tamron, Sigma, whatever it may be. So stick around and let's go and take some photos, all using this lens. I mean, look at it, tiny. Now with it being a 20mm to 60mm, you know, it's a really versatile focal range, and because of that, it is like an everyday lens. And that idea of it being really small and very light and compact is so important to me when I'm just out and about. If I'm wanting a lens to kind of do everything, I don't want it to be really cumbersome. You can look at the Sigma, you know, 24 to 70, the Tamron 28 to 75, which I had on my Sony system. You know, they were pretty hefty lenses. And if you're carrying it around all day, it just gets in the way. Whereas with this lens, I don't really notice it. And I guess I'm somewhat uniquely placed because I shoot both in a casual sense for my personal work, which is what I share here on YouTube, and I also, you know, shoot commercially. I get paid for my photography and my video work, where I'm doing client work and shooting for businesses. And I've used this lens in both situations, and it's performed so much better than I could have ever imagined. It's really impressed me, and it's never really let me down. And it's because of that it lives on my camera pretty much all of the time. And I don't really want to dwell too much on the sort of technical stuff in this video. Again, like I mentioned, I want the takeaways from this video to apply to any number of different zoom lenses of a similar focal length, because it's the focal length that I think is the sort of jewel in the crown of this lens. So let me talk to you about that. So I'm just going to interrupt myself here before I carry on talking about this lens, just to say a big thank you to you guys for your response to last week's video. In that video, I actually shared my own music that I'd sort of written and recorded for that particular video, and I mentioned that it's something that I wanted to do more of on this channel. For those of you who don't know, I was a musician before I ever picked up a camera and did, you know, photography professionally. I've got a degree in music and I've been playing guitar since I was like 9 years old, and I've always struggled to find a way to share that part of my creativity, you know, here on YouTube. So I just thought, if I can write the music and feature my music in my videos, it'll be a good way to do that. It was quite daunting. I didn't really know the response or if it would sort of detract from the videos in any way, but based on your comments, I think it worked out okay. So I just wanted to jump in and say that I'm really grateful for all the support and all the kind words. Anyway, back to the video. Now in that video I sort of mentioned that I was exploring my new local area, and that's kind of what I'm doing today. Today I've just decided to kind of go for a drive and sort of see what I find. It's a nice way to shoot. It's a way that I really enjoy shooting at the moment. I sort of pick a loop on Google Maps, something kind of circular, maybe 10 miles max, and I just get in the car, I drive, I put on a podcast, normally something photography related. I'll put a recommendation up on screen of what I've been listening to, so you can go and check that out. And you know, a lens like this is perfect for that situation because I don't really know what I'm going to find. You know, I don't know what I'm going to photograph, so it's hard to plan things like focal lengths and what, you know, I want the images to look like, because I don't really know what I'm going to shoot. Now the thing with this approach to photography is that it's made me perhaps a little bit lazy, because, you know, I'm just driving around and it's very run and gun. I don't know what I'm going to find. And if I come across something, I just have to pull over and sort of get the photo. It's not like I'm kind of hiking up a big hill where I'm planning to sort of stay in the same place all day, where I can, maybe think about what I'm going to photograph and plan a kit accordingly. I did pick up, when I bought this system, a few prime lenses. Got the 50mm f1.8 and the 85mm f1.8 to kind of complement this lens, because there is a time and a place for that when you're trying to be a bit more methodical. But for me, I just need to have all of my focal lengths available to me, because I just don't know what I'm going to photograph. I don't really have time to plan, but that's just a nice way to shoot. It's just what I'm enjoying at the moment. And I think because of that, this lens is sticking to the camera. And it's nice to travel light, isn't it? Oh, I tell you what, guys, we are on for a really cool shot. It's always fascinating to me, the things that I get excited about as I'm driving around. I've just spotted a great subject, which is an old Land Rover Defender with a tarp and a load of tyres on it. Am I weird? Can anybody else relate to this enthusiasm and excitement? And this is actually a good subject to talk about this whole point around focal length. Some people get excited by grand vistas, other people get excited by amazing light, and I seemingly get excited by decrepit looking vehicles outside of rundown farms. Maybe that says something about me, I don't know. But I thought this subject was a great example of why having a variable zoom is so important. Because you've probably heard a lot of photographers say perhaps that you can just zoom with your feet, just have a prime lens, a fixed focal length, and then just move to kind of find the right perspective and the right framing. And whilst that is perfectly good advice if you're using a zoom lens, I don't always think that that's necessarily the best approach. And it's because of perspective and compression and how you want that scene to look. Now, driving past that particular scene, I wanted it to look kind of how it appeared to my eye. And our range of vision is anywhere from around sort of like 40mm up to about 55mm. So there's, a bit of range to deal with there. And yes, I could have gotten closer to the subject and shot wider, but that would create more distortion, and that creates a field of view that doesn't feel particularly natural. Or you could be further away and shoot at, a longer focal length, maybe 60mm on this lens, but then you're adding more compression. You're making the background and the foreground shallower. And again, that doesn't look particularly natural. So I knew that I was going to have to shoot at around 40 to 50mm to get the scene in the kind of, the kind of perspective that I wanted it to be. So while zooming with my feet is one aspect, adjusting your focal length to get the right field of view and to get the right amount of compression and distortion is a really important part of the equation. And I think that thing about field of view and my preference for field of view is another reason why this lens in particular at 20mm to 60mm is such a compelling choice. And when we look at my old Sony kit, I had the Tamron 28 to 75mm f2.8, a great lens, have no complaints with it. And I used to shoot a lot at sort of like 35, 40, 50mm, but I didn't really do much at the sort of telephoto end of that lens at 75mm. And I used to find that 28mm wasn't always wide enough, especially in my commercial work, because I used to shoot, interiors and, businesses, things like that. So I got a Sony 20mm f1.8 prime lens to pair with that, and that lens is what I shot all of my commercial interior work on. And you'll often find in interior photography a lot of people shoot at sort of 14, 16mm to get that super wide field of view, but it's just not something that I like in my photos. And I shot all of my interiors at 20mm, and I think they tend to look a bit more natural.
I think it's also worth pointing out that I found 20mm to be such a great focal length for shooting landscapes, because if you want to capture a wide scene but you don't want it to look super wide and ultra distorted, then 20mm is going to give you a really, really pleasing field of view. I also found it helpful for shooting foregrounds, in the landscape. Again, if you want to get some exaggeration to bring out the emphasis in foreground elements, then 20mm allows you to do that without things looking super weird and distorted.
So I found this lens, the 20mm to 60mm, was kind of all the best bits of, you know, that type of photography. It's the field of view that I think looks most natural and is the most usable. And if you enjoy shooting in a similar way, then a focal length of around 20mm up to 60mm could be perfect for you. So a lot of photographers tend to disregard kit lenses because they are often variable apertures, meaning that you're not able to get a consistent aperture across the entire focal range. That's why a lot of photographers probably choose a 24 to 70 f2.8, because you get that 2.8 aperture across the entire focal range, which, you know, certainly has its place. But I know from my experience when I had the Tamron 28 to 75 f2.8, I never shot at f2.8. The images were a bit soft at f2.8, and for the types of scenes that I shoot, what I'm sharing today, my landscape stuff, I'm typically shooting from 5.6 to f8 to f11, where any lens is going to be perfectly sharp and optically efficient, I suppose. And I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind, especially if you yourself like to photograph landscapes and scenes where you don't need a shallow depth of field. There's no reason to necessarily have a lens with an f2.8 constant aperture.
I'm going to jump in here to just clarify that point, because there's another important aspect to aperture that goes beyond just the creative use of, you know, getting a shallow depth of field and nice bokeh. You know, having an f2.8 constant aperture across your entire focal length just means that you're actually able to shoot wider, to therefore capture more light across the whole focal range that your lens has. You know, shooting at f2.8, although it will give you a shallow depth of field, it will also let more light onto your sensor, so you can potentially, you know, shoot at slightly faster shutter speeds without having to raise your ISO to compensate. But for me personally, you know, especially since moving to the S5ii, you know, I absolutely love the dynamic range of this camera. I love the in-body stabilization, so I can shoot handheld at, you know, fairly slow shutter speeds, and I can also shoot with this camera with an increased ISO and still get really usable photos. You know, I've shot this, you know, commercially at sort of like ISO 2000 for photos, and, you know, they look absolutely fine. So again, I'm not too bothered about having a 2.8 constant aperture. I can shoot at 5.6 f8, and if I can't quite get enough light, I'll just increase the ISO. I really don't care.
You know, if I want to shoot anything with a shallow depth of field, if I want to do portraiture or, you know, anything like that, that's where I use my prime lenses. I'll use the 50 and 85mm f1.8 because those lenses are designed to be able to shoot more optically proficiently at a wider aperture. I think that's something that's super important to keep in mind. And it's why this lens performs so well, because I'm never shooting at f3.5, for example. I'm always at around f8. It's just the best way to render the scenes that I like to photograph. So it's important that you think about what you like to photograph and whether the lens that you're looking to choose is going to be able to handle that job.
So I'll round off this video just by kind of summarizing and giving a few final thoughts. I hope you enjoyed the photos that I shared in this video. I hope they demonstrated, you know, how optically great this lens is. And I do feel like the stigma around, you know, kit lenses does need to change, because for me personally, I've had zero issues with this lens, and, you know, it is that focal range that I feel is the most compelling argument for owning this particular lens or any kind of equivalent lens that you might find, because I do feel like having 20mm is just super valuable. You know, for me, filming videos, you know, for vlogging and stuff, 20mm is just absolutely great and super usable. And if you like your photographs to have a more natural viewpoint, a natural field of view, not too much distortion, nothing super wide, then I think you'll have a lot of creative enjoyment from shooting at 20mm, whilst not having to sacrifice being able to shoot at, you know, slightly more telephoto focal lengths. So for all of those reasons, I think this lens is probably the most versatile and the most usable lens that you can potentially get if that's the way you like to shoot. I guess the main thing is just not getting hung up on that idea that a variable aperture means that you're sacrificing some kind of image quality. I firmly believe that from my experience of using zoom lenses with constant apertures is that I was never really shooting
at the low extremes of f2.8 anyway. So if you can put that to one side and just think about your needs in terms of focal range and weight and form factor, then I think that goes a long way in making sure that you're going to have a great experience using any particular lens. So guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you did enjoy it, and I hope it wasn't too gear centric. I tried to make it slightly more universally applicable for anybody who doesn't shoot Lumix, but is maybe just thinking about an everyday lens or how they're going to approach their photography and the kit that they use. So if you did find it helpful, do leave the video a thumbs up. And as always, I love to hear from you down in the comments. So I'd love to know your thoughts on the photos. Let me know what lenses you enjoy. And if you do shoot with this lens yourself, I'd love to know your experiences as well. As always, guys, do consider hitting the subscribe button if you haven't already. Ring the bell to get notified of when new videos go live. And I will see you all next week for another one. All right, take care, guys.